Happy Tuesday, everybody. So incredibly happy to be here. And we have a really amazing guest today. Our first ever poet is in here, and she's got a heck of a story. She is from Jersey, and no, I don't mean New Jersey, not as in the United States. She's actually from Jersey, as in a British Isle. So I'm really thrilled to have Traci O'Dea here. And here is her book. We're going to meet her and find out about her inspiration and learn her talent and everything else. So Traci, welcome. First of all, very excited to have you here.
Thank you so much. Just happy to be here on a Tuesday. My nickname in several countries is Traci Tuesday, so it's sort of fun being here on a Tuesday.
See, we planned it all. So first, before we dive into your poetry and your book and everything else, you are in Jersey, and of course, inquiring minds want to know, how did you end up there? I know your parents are here in the US. Can you tell us a little about your adventure and how you're there?
Sure. So I'm in Old Jersey, as we like to call it. It's a little tiny island that is basically off the coast of France in the English Channel. And I moved here with my now husband. We were both living in the British Virgin Islands. That's where we met. I was an English lecturer there, and he is a lawyer. He was lawyering there. And we met, and we fell in love, and he moved here, and I wasn't sure I was going to or not. And then a year later, I did. So I've been here for 5 years, and it's beautiful. I have a sea view. I live right across the street from the beach. I go swimming just about every single day, even in the winter, and I just love it.
It is really scenic and beautiful there. It is definitely, no offense to my New Jersey fans, because we have New Jersey people in here, but it's not New Jersey, just to make sure that we're clear. Now, you have a really incredible story about poetry. And I was wondering if you could kind of start from the beginning. Like, how did you become interested in poetry? And then how did it go from an interest to a passion? And now you've got a career to it. Tell us a little bit about your journey, please.
I think I've been writing poems as long as I could write. I don't remember ever not writing poems.
Wow.
So I don't think there was ever a time when I didn't write poetry. I can remember some really early poems and songs that I wrote. I mean, definitely some about unicorns and flowers. And there was a grapevine by my house when I was little. So like, I remember some of those guys. And it was always just a way for me to just express myself and I think, process whatever I was feeling. I always I really liked making up stories and playing with dolls and I used to play a lot by myself, and I really sort of valued that sort of solitary, like, processing time. Mm-hmm. And I think that was when I started writing poems, was just it just felt really natural. I was always a reader, so I think it felt really normal to me to also be a writer.
And then did you end up studying poetry? How did you convert and go into it professionally too?
So I did. I think I was not sure what I was going to do when I went to college, so I took a year off. And I was seeing someone at the time, and he said to me, because I was talking to him about, he was really into European cars. And I was like, oh, you have your thing, you have your hobby. And he was just like, what are you talking about? Like, you have poetry. And I just sort of didn't think about it as anything other than just natural, like, I don't know, eating or breathing or taking a bath. It was just sort of like, that was just something in my life. And so then that sort of gave me the clarity, oh yeah, this is probably something I should do. So I went to University of Maryland and got an English degree with a concentration in creative writing poetry. And then I took some time off again. I worked for a while all over the place. And then I went to Hopkins and got a master's and then an MFA in poetry.
Fantastic. And then what was your first dive into doing? I know you're an editor, you've got all kinds of things going on. So tell us a little bit about your professional endeavors after you got educated through all this.
Sure. So my first publication was in Poetry Magazine in 2003. And Poetry Magazine is like the oldest publisher of poetry, like the oldest specifically poetry journal in the English speaking world. Wow. So the fact that my first poem was in poetry was really exciting and a really big deal.
That's
But that was in
really
2000.
impressive way to start.
That was in 2003, so it's taken me 17 years to get a book published since then. I certainly didn't have a book in 2003. But so since then, I've just been publishing poems in various journals over the years. And then I started volunteering for Smartish Pace, which is a poetry journal in Baltimore. It's a nonprofit. They've been around probably 20 years as well. So I joined up with them probably in 2004. So been with them for a really long time. I'm still a poetry editor for them.
Oh.
I'm a poetry editor for a journal in the Caribbean from when I lived there called Moco. And I do a lot of, I'm their poetry editor. And then I'm a poet. I just recently started editing for, there's a new alternative news site based out of DC called The News Station. And they just started a poetry journal on their site. So I'm the poetry editor for that.
Fantastic. Now, I want to dive into your collection, and the story behind it is amazing. But I think one of the things that's so interesting when you and I were talking is you shared about how you use that to pretty much process your emotions. So before we deep dive into the story, can you take a minute and just talk about how it serves you in that way?
Definitely. I like, in your head is all a jumble and you can't really, it's just sort of takes on its own world, and it feels like the universe is inside your brain. Well, if I have something going on that is really emotionally sensitive to me, that feeling can be really overwhelming. So instead of sort of giving into that feeling, or instead of, like, a lot of people have different ways of dealing with it. And I do, like, I walk, I swim, I do those things, but it still stays in my head until I get it down on paper. Once I get it down on paper, it's sort of out of me. And I'm then able to look at it as sort of an objective object. That doesn't make sense, but I'm able to really look at it. And then I can even edit it, or I can turn it into a sonnet, or I can make it rhyme, and I can do all these things with it that no longer make it this sort of pressing, nagging, sad, or upsetting emotion, but instead it becomes sort of a work of art. And then it is a little bit like I'm then able to control it, but also I'm then able to craft it into something that is beautiful, or that is moving, or that is at least descriptive enough to let other people maybe appreciate what I'm going through, not because I want them to necessarily feel what I'm feeling, but that they can relate it back, and maybe it'll help them process something that they're feeling.
Absolutely. It is art. There's no doubt about it. It is a form of art, what you do. And what everybody goes through, what you're talking about, especially with the pandemic and everything that we went through. Everybody went through times where, they were overwhelmed and their voice in their head was too much. But what a not only constructive but contributing way to deal with it that you did, because honestly, you see everything. Some people pick fights with their families. Some people drink alcohol. Some people will overeat. Like, people will find things that they will do because they don't have a natural way to process it. So for you to do something that creates art that you can share with other people is extraordinary, because you're not just helping yourself, you're helping everybody out there, which is pretty wild.
Well, don't get me wrong, I definitely did all of those other things during COVID too. I can't write away the entire pandemic, but so there were definitely some of those other things as well.
Well, I appreciate your vulnerability and your honesty. I don't think anybody was angelic during this whole pandemic, because that was a hot mess of an experience for all of us. Hopefully we'll never experience again in this lifetime. But, while you were going through the pandemic, which all of us had our own issues, though, you were really dealing with some specific things with your dad. And can you take a minute, share the story of your father? Because that's really the inspiration behind this collection of poetry. So can you kind of let everybody in on that?
Yeah, sure. So I guess I'll approach it through the poetry aspects. So I was shopping around my collection of poems, like the ones that I've been publishing since 2003. And I sent it to one publisher in Scotland, and she said, I love your poems, but I'm sort of looking for something a little bit more topical, more relevant to the pandemic. And also, we like our poetry books to be illustrated. So if you know anyone who might illustrate it, and it just felt like, oh my God, like all I've been doing is writing poems about my dad recently. And the reason being, my dad started disappearing a little bit before the pandemic. And then through the pandemic, it made it much more stressful because there were all these new restrictions in place. And he was disappearing, but where was he going? Because nothing was open. And so he, about 4 or 5 years ago, had some strokes when he was visiting me in the British Virgin Islands. And I mean, he showed up at a court date while he was on holiday, thinking that while he was on vacation, thinking that he had to go to court. So he literally showed up at the courthouse while I was at work saying, I have a court date today. And they were like, no, sir, you don't have a court date here. Like, you don't live here, etc. So then they called me and pulled me out of work, and I had to go sort of take care of him. And I flew him back to the USA. And shortly thereafter, he started using drugs again. He relapsed, and he had been sober for about 15 years at that point.
Wow.
Sober, vegan, yogi, painter. Like, I mean, he was just and super generous man. I mean, just loving, wonderful, kind, funny. And then he started using drugs again. So one of the doctors said that he may have like fried the impulse control center of his brain. So it wasn't even just drugs. If he wanted a hot dog, he needed that hot dog right then and there. So he would fixate on certain things. And like, I'm not a doctor, so this is just sort of theories that I've heard and what could have happened. Or he could have just relapsed just out of nowhere. So he started using again, and he was very honest with me about it. I asked him. I found out because my ex-husband goes to the same coffee shop he does, and my dad was banned from that coffee shop because they found baggies in the bathroom after he was in there more than once. So I confronted him, and he was very honest with me about it. And then we started talking about, what we were going to do about it and getting him to rehab. So we got him to a couple of rehabs. He went in and out. And then literally when the pandemic hit, he was in a rehab in Florida. And we're like, well, where's he going to go? So that sort of kicked off this whole very stressful year that continues to this day, where my dad is always trying to get drugs, sort of disappearing, doesn't know his own limitations, doesn't really realize that he just has no idea what his condition is, and just sort of, and he fixates on a thing, and he'll fixate on it until he gets it. And then if it's drugs, then he ODs because he can't stop himself either. So he will take enough to OD. And he literally just OD'd again 2 nights ago on my birthday.
I'm so sorry.
So no, this has literally been my whole life. And I know I'm laughing about it because I talked to him on the phone and he's just cracking up and he's trying to lie to me about it. I'm like, Dad, I know that you OD'd. And then he's like, who narked on me? And I mean, he's just, I know that it's really heartbreaking. And obviously I'm going to have to write a poem about what happened on my birthday, but he is just this lighthearted, funny man. And we call him Tommy the Cat because we said he had 9 lives, but I think he's up to 90. He just keeps bouncing back. I mean, he broke his eye socket at one point because he fell down. He's broken ribs. He's broken his leg. I mean, this has all been happening over the past couple of years. And especially during the pandemic, it was pretty stressful.
Yeah. So there's a bunch of things we got to tackle in there. So he has some at least mild form of dementia, and he's got the substance abuse. So I guess 2 parts to it. Does he understand? Like, I can tell you personally, we have 2 family members with dementia right now, and one of them in the beginning was insistent that she did not have dementia. And I don't know if he's come to grips with that, or you have to have that conversation along with the substance conversation.
It depends on the week, whether he wants to admit that he has it or not. So sometimes he'll be like, I got dementia. And then other days he'll just be like, I don't know what you're talking about. My memory's fine. And he's also a con man. So he's really good at I was with him once when he was given a diagnostic about dementia. And they, there's one thing where it's like the thing is show the person an object and get them to name it. So this girl showed him a watch and said, "What is this?" And he said, "That's a bracelet that tells time," because he couldn't come up with the word for the word with what for the word of watch. But he's so intelligent that he just manipulated it into something else. And she was like, "Oh, that's really clever." And I said, "No, that's not. He doesn't know the word for watch." Come on.
So he's a charmer in the middle of all this, that's for sure.
Oh, he is such a charmer. I talked to his nurse today and he was just like, "Your dad." Oh my gosh. Keep him away from those female nurses. He's
So I hate to laugh, but you're so engaging and so charming yourself.
No, it's funny.
So when this was all going down, you're in Jersey and he is overseas in the United States, and you're trying to manage all of that long distance. And
yes.
So then you decide to do the poetry. Now, you mentioned in passing there that he's an artist, but it's his artwork that is in your book as well. Can you tell everyone about that, please?
So that was really when the publisher said that to me, I just felt like, oh, I've got to write this book about Dad, and it's got to have his artwork in it. And that just really clicked. So he is a painter and he does these really interesting and crazy creative paintings like nothing. They're so outsider artist sort of type paintings. They're like nothing you've ever seen before. They're very playful, very bright.
Yes.
And so I just thought, okay, they need to be in there.
So how
and of course he said yes,
go with your dad when you're like, "Hey, I'm going to write a book of poems because I need to express and process all of this, and I want to put your artwork in." How did that conversation take place, and how did that go?
I was like, "I'm writing a book of poetry and your paintings are going to be in it." And he said, "Okay, that sounds great." Like he's so easygoing. He didn't care. And he's read it.
Oh, and he has read it. Okay.
Oh yeah.
And how did he feel about it?
He just said, he definitely, I've read him poems from it over the phone before. Like a couple of them won some prizes. So I read him some poems. Like, "I won a prize for this poem about you. I'm going to read it to you." And he's a very emotional man too. So he cried and then he read the book, which has a lot of sort of these diary entries, these letters to him that say, "Dear Dad." And so he hadn't read any of those because they're very personal and they're directly addressed to a you, and the you is Dad. He just said, "Sorry I made you worry so much." But he can't, he really can't help it. And I'm never angry with him. I'm just worried about him most of the time.
Of course.
Frustrated sometimes, and just sad that he can't manage this on his own.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking to deal with someone who's got a substance issue, and it's heartbreaking to deal with someone who has dementia. We have both in the family, but not in the same person. And God bless you for being not only so supportive and sweet, but maintaining a sense of humor through the whole thing. You should get not only a prize for your poetry, but honestly a prize for your outlook and your mindset of dealing with those challenges. And I know also that you have a great relationship with your mom, who's super proud of you. And what was the dynamic like with your mom? Because you've got a relationship with him, but then this whole book and this artwork and all these things around him, but you've got the relationship with your mom too. And I know you wrote about it a little bit too, which I thought was beautiful. Maybe you can share how you express that to your mom.
Sure. Do you want me to read it?
Yes, that would be fantastic.
It's easier. It's just easier to read that one than to
reflection. I have to say, yes, I would love for you to read it.
It's probably a lot easier to read that poem than to express it any other way, because I feel like I've already sort of expressed it in the best way that I can. But before that, so Dad and I did both agree to dedicate the book to my mom beforehand. So it's dedicated to her, And that's not just from me, that's from both of us. And the cutest thing of all was that my mom read the book several times before she even realized that the book was dedicated to her. And then, you know, because my husband kept asking me, like, well, has your mom said anything? Has she said anything about the dedication? I was like, no, she hasn't. That's really weird. And then turns out she hadn't even noticed. And then when she did, she wept a bit and was very excited about that. I can't find the poem. I know it's in here.
It is wonderful. I did enjoy reading it so much. And what's really interesting, Traci, I'm stalling for you while you find it too.
Yes, thank you.
Let me know when you find it. But one of the things that's such a powerful dynamic is not only what you're dealing with, how you're expressing yourself, the art you're creating, but there are people who don't think it's possible as a family to stay intact and love each other and maintain civility and closeness at all when they're going through the challenges like you are. And you have really shown that. I mean, your dad and you put the book together in some ways. I mean, you wrote the poetry, it's got his art, it's dedicated to your mom. And throughout that, you kept all the plates spinning of your family, which I think for so many people dealing with family challenges in either of these distinctions that you have is so inspiring, really is.
Well, it's not just me. I have an older sister who's been really helpful with dad as well. And she's closer. She's in Baltimore.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I mean, we are pretty supportive of each other. And I've always felt like I have such a great support network and such a safety net. So
Yeah.
I know that I can take these risks. I know that I can move all over the world because I always know that I can come home. Like if I fall flat on my face, if everything goes tits up, I know that I have two parents and my stepdad who love me to death, and my sisters who would take me in a heartbeat. So it sort of gives you when you know that there's a net under you, you're more likely to be able to do those flips if you're an acrobat. So I'm very lucky that I have that net.
You definitely are, but you know, it's also you're carrying on what your family has established because you're making something really special too with the way you're interacting with everyone. I don't think your mom could be any more proud of you. I've never spoken to your dad, but I will tell you, your mom 100%. Did you find it by any chance?
I found it.
Great. Please share it. That would be wonderful.
Okay, so this is one of those Dear Dad poems. Dear Dad, Mom says she's jealous that you're getting a book. She's not. I get her point. She raised us on her own. I never knew you growing up. Sometimes I'd walk past homeless men in Fells and ask if they were you. She doesn't know that not having to write about her is the greatest compliment. It means that she's the opposite of stress, what I escape to, not from. I write the things my brain can't handle on its own. I get them down on paper, see them on the page, then wrestle them into a form I can control, or I get overwhelmed. My stepdad's never hidden his disdain for you, for choosing drugs over your wife and kids. He married Mom when we were 8 and 11 and knew you never tried to see us our whole lives until you sobered up and we grew up. He didn't want you at my wedding at their house, but had to let you come. So as I pass him in the driveway, roll down windows to say hello, and he asks if you're okay, tears come. You have no clue how much it kills me, keeping you alive.
That is some powerful stuff you write there, my dear. Really amazing. So I'm just so thrilled you're on here. And I know some people hearing this would love to get your collection. And I'm very happy to have a copy here. I highly recommend it. It is not available on Amazon yet, though, because it was just recently published. So we're going to put a link below this interview so that people can go ahead and, you know, grab themselves a copy if they would like to as well. And then, you know, before we wrap up today, is there anything that you would like to share in terms of maybe people who feel like they want to write poetry or they want to write songs or they want to do something and they don't have the courage because they think it's silly, they don't have the confidence that you have? Is there anything you could share with someone who is feeling that bottled up feeling and needs a way to get it out in a creative and healthy way?
I honestly think people get scared when they start to write something down sometimes, and they might feel intimidated by that. So I always give this advice, which is speak it. So everyone has little phone recorders. Everyone has a recorder on their phone. Say it into your phone, just like you're telling a story, or, just whatever comes to your mind, because then you're not intimidated, and there isn't really the barrier between your brain and a pen or a typewriter and a page. So instead you can sort of free flow. And I think if you don't feel confident writing something down, then actually the easiest thing to do is to just honestly record yourself saying whatever you want to say or whatever you feel that you have to say. And then you can write it down, and then you can play with it, and then you can edit it. Because the hardest part is sort of getting that first bit down. And then the fun part is turning it into a poem or turning it into a song. So just getting to play with it once you've sort of gotten it out in the first place.
That's fantastic. And, congratulations on a really incredible collection of poetry. It's beautiful. Congratulations on your first publication of all of it. And also, happy belated birthday. I hope the next one is much more boring. And we certainly pray for your success and your father's health and recovery, and just for your whole family to continue to cope and deal in such a beautiful way. So thank you so much for being a guest here today, Traci. Really appreciate and honor everything that you're doing.
Thank you so much for having me on, and I honor everything that you're doing.
Oh, well, thank you so much. And I will put the link to Traci's collection if you're interested in getting it. It's fantastic. I will put that below the interview. And Traci has joined the group. So if you want to send her a message or a comment when you watch this, whether you're watching it live, or I know we have a lot of people who watch it over the next few days, she said she would peek back in and respond to any comments you had. So thank you all. And thank you, Traci.
Thanks, Leanne.
And we'll see you all next Tuesday. Have a fantastic week.
Bye.